It wasn't right to be quiet. Kale Rivera had been on enough starships to know that medical bays were never this quiet. There should be the constant hum of life support systems, the quiet beep of monitors keeping an eye on vital signs, and the soft whisper of air recyclers keeping the air stable. Instead, the medical bay of the Starforged greeted him with an eerie, broken stillness broken only by the occasional flicker of failing lights and the sputter of equipment that was about to die. He stood at the door with his old tool bag over one shoulder and took it all in. The bay was huge, about the same size as a small station hospital, and there were rows of medical pods on both sides of the main hallway. The shapes and sizes of the pods were as different as the stars themselves, and each one was made for a different species. Some had thick amber fluid inside. Some of them glowed with soft bioluminescence. A few of them made low-frequency vibrations that Kale could feel in his bones. But they were all failing. The lights in the pods blinked on and off at random times. Readouts showed error codes in a dozen different alien languages. Kale could see the patients inside through the clear surfaces. They were still forms of beings he'd never seen before, their bodies frozen in what should have been healing stasis but looked more like a slow march toward death. Kale said, "This is worse than I thought," as he ran a calloused hand through his dark, graying hair. He was 42 years old and thin and angular from years of crawling through ship conduits and squeezing into maintenance shafts that weren't meant for people. His coveralls were covered in a rainbow of fluids from 100 different boats, including lubricants, coolants, and fluids that couldn't be identified. His hands showed the scars of his work, burn marks, thin cuts, and grease that wouldn't come off even after a lot of scrubbing. Kale was not a doctor. According to normal standards, he wasn't even a real engineer. He had never graduated from one of the well-known technical institutes on Earth or Mars. He had 30 years of experience fixing things that other people had given up on. In the outer colonies, people called him a ship whisperer. He was the person you called when your ship was making strange noises, when systems broke down in ways that didn't follow diagnostic protocols, or when the problem was so complicated that even the manufacturer couldn't help. He had fixed old colony ships that were held together by faith and quick thinking. He brought life back to military ships that were so damaged they should have been thrown away. He had even worked on alien salvage before the war, figuring out technology that people barely understood. But this? A medical bay full of aliens who were dying and an AI that couldn't help them. Mr. Rivera, this was different. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. It had a smooth, almost musical tone, but it also had an undercurrent of something Kale had never heard from AI before: desperation. "Thank you for answering my call for help. I guess it's Medicorps?" Kale asked the ship's medical AI. "Yes." As the medical core operational intelligence of the Starforged, a long-range exploration ship that is in critical condition right now, I am in charge of its health. My main job is to keep the health of the crew, which includes people from 17 different species. I am failing. The admission hung in the air like a real thing. AIs, especially advanced ones like Medicorps, never failed. They were built with backups upon backups, self-repair protocols, and predictive algorithms that could see problems coming before they happened. It was very rare for someone to admit they had failed. "Walk me through it," Kale said as he set down his bag and took out a handheld scanner. "What's going on?" About 72 hours ago, the Starforged ran into a problem while making a normal jump through subspace. We don't know what the anomaly was, but the effects were immediate and terrible. Systems all over the ship started to fail one after the other. The main power went down to 37%. The navigation system went down. And most importantly, the crew started to show signs of severe physical distress. Kale went to the nearest pod and looked at the readouts. If he remembered correctly, the language was Drelian. This species is known for having 3 hearts and bones that are like crystals. The readings showed that several organs had failed, cells were breaking down quickly, and it looked like the being's natural healing processes had completely stopped working. Wasn't the AI supposed to take care of this? Kale asked. "You have the most advanced medical database in all of space. Treatment plans for every known species. Systems for automated surgery. What went wrong?" "I can't figure out how to solve that paradox," Medicorps answered, and Kale could swear he heard anger in the synthetic voice. "My diagnostics are working as they should. I can tell what every symptom is and how it differs from normal health markers. My treatment plans are being carried out perfectly. But the patients keep getting worse." Kale frowned and pulled up the diagnostic history on his scanner. There were pages and pages of data about perfect medical procedures, exact medication dosages, and the best ways to control the environment. Everything should have gone well. Like, Medicorps stopped for a moment to look for words. "It's like I'm talking but they can't hear me. I'm giving them exactly what they need, but they can't get it. I've never seen a situation where the right treatment has bad effects. Kale moved from pod to pod, and his trained eye saw things that most people would miss. A Vrelian with 6 arms, their skin, which is usually bright, turned sickly gray. A Koth, a huge creature that looked like a mix between a bear and a rock, was breathing heavily and shallowly. A Whisper, rare, fragile beings that looked like solidified mist and barely held together. There are 17 kinds. There are a total of 23 patients. Everyone is dying even though they are getting great care. How much time do they have? Kale asked in a low voice. At the current rate of decline, the first deaths will happen in less than 18 hours. The whole crew will be gone in 48 hours. Kale closed his eyes and felt the weight of it on his shoulders. This wasn't like fixing a broken engine or sending power through broken wires. These were lives, even if they were strange and alien. And if he couldn't figure this out, they were all going to die. That he sat down on the floor with his back against one of the pods and said, "I need to think." It was something he learned as a young mechanic's apprentice. His mentor had told him that sometimes the best way to figure out what was wrong with a ship was to sit still and listen to what it was trying to tell you. That he could feel the vibrations through the deck. The Starforge was still alive, but not for long. The changes in power made the rhythm uneven, like a heart that beats too fast. The environmental systems were working extra hard to keep the temperature and atmosphere stable. And there was something else underneath it all, a vague feeling of wrongness that Kale couldn't quite put into words but could definitely feel. "Medicore," he said after a few minutes of silence. "You said the strange thing happened when you jumped into subspace. What kind of strange thing?" "Not known. Sensors found a distortion in space that shouldn't have been there. The jump drive tried to make up for it, but the feedback that came from the interaction between our subspace field and the anomaly spread through all of the ship's systems." "Even the medical bay?" "Yes. But I've done full system checks. All of the hardware is working within acceptable limits. It's not a problem with the mechanics." Kale nodded slowly and an idea began to take shape. What if the equipment isn't the problem? What if the anomaly did something to the crew that your sensors can't pick up because they are looking for physical signs? "I don't get it. All symptoms are signs of something else going on in the body." "Not always," Kale said as he stood up and walked back to the Drelian's pod. He put his hand on the clear surface and felt the faint warmth coming from inside. "Sometimes the problem isn't with the body. It's about how the body interacts with everything else." In a way he had seen it before. Old colony ships where the crew got sick for no apparent reason. It turned out that the ship's harmonic frequencies had drifted just enough to mess with people's circadian rhythms. Military ships where soldiers got strange illnesses that went away when the ship's radiation shielding was adjusted. People didn't know how deep the connection was between living things and their surroundings. "I need to see your life support integration protocols," Kale said. "All the things that link the medical pods to the ship's main systems." Getting to now. A holographic display appeared in front of Kale, showing a 3D map of how the medical bay was connected to the Starforge's main systems. Power lines, data lines, atmospheric feeds, waste recycling, and thermal regulation all came together in a complicated web that would take days to fully figure out. Kale didn't need days though. He had spent 30 years learning to see patterns that other people missed, to find the one thing that didn't fit in, and the one point of failure that was hidden among thousands of working systems. And there it was. Son of a. Kale leaned in closer to get a better look at a certain point where the medical bay's power systems connected to the ship's main energy grid. "Medicore, do you see this loop of feedback?" "Yes, I do. A small harmonic resonance between the main power grid and the medical systems. Well within the limits of what is acceptable. It shouldn't be a problem." "Shouldn't?" Kale said. "But what if that weird thing you hit changed the resonance frequency just enough to make this small feedback into something bigger? Something that is always sending your patients energy changes that their bodies can't handle. That would mean that the anomaly changed basic physical constants in a small area. The chances, I know it's impossible," Kale said in the end. "But I've made a living fixing things that seem impossible. And right now, those patients don't have time to figure out the odds." That he could feel it now, that familiar tingle of certainty that came when he was on the right track. It wasn't because of broken tools or failed procedures. It was something more subtle and dangerous. The AI wasn't giving the patients what they needed. "I need tools," Kale said as he walked over to his bag. "And I need to get to the main power junction for this bay. We're going to do something that your rules would never let us do." "What are your plans?" Kale took out a bunch of things that looked more like junk than tools for measuring things. There were salvaged circuit boards, hand-wound coils of copper wire, a few crystals he had bought at a market on Proxima Station, and what looked like a real mechanical switch from an electrical panel that was built before space travel. "I'm going to make a filter," he said with a smile, even though the situation was serious. "A very dirty, very strange filter that should calm down those harmonic changes and give your patients' bodies a chance to respond to your treatments." "That is very strange. I can't promise that it will work." "Me neither," Kale said, already kneeling next to an access panel and prying it open. "But here's what I've learned in 30 years of fixing things that can't be fixed. Sometimes the most advanced technology in the universe needs a little help from the past. You don't always need another diagnostic algorithm. Sometimes you just need dirty hands and duct tape." That he looked up at the medical pods and the dying people inside them, and he felt that familiar determination settle into his bones. "Besides," he said quietly, "what other choice do we have?" The Starforged groaned around him, and its systems stuttered like a sick person trying to catch their breath. Kale Rivera, a mechanic and ship whisperer, got to work on the most important repair of his life. 3 hours later, Kale was elbow-deep in the power junction, and the blue glow of the exposed circuitry lit up his face. That's when Medicor's voice broke through his focus. "Mr. Rivera, patient 7's vital signs are failing in a very bad way. For minutes until the heart stops beating." Kale kept working and didn't look up. "Which one is patient 7? "The Vrelian. 6-limbed species, mostly from the water, are currently going through complete cardiovascular collapse." "Is it the one with gray skin?" "That's right." Kale's hands moved faster as he put together the last few parts of his makeshift harmonic filter. It was ugly, a patchwork of mismatched technology that would make any good engineer cry, but if his theory was right, it might work. 3 minutes, Medicor said. "I heard you the first time," Kale said, his forehead dripping with sweat. The junction was too hot, much hotter than it should have been. This was another sign that energy was moving in ways it shouldn't have. He had followed the subtle changes in the feedback loop through half of the medical base systems, like a bloodhound following a scent. The anomaly had done exactly what he thought it would. It had changed the harmonic frequency of the ship's power systems just enough to make a constant interference pattern. It was like trying to sleep next to a speaker that was playing a sound that was just out of your hearing range. You couldn't tell on purpose, but your body knew something was wrong. That interference was deadly for the alien crew, who were used to certain types of energy environments and had medical systems that were carefully tuned. 2 minutes. "Almost there," Kale said, making the last link. The filter started to hum, and he could feel a low-frequency vibration in his teeth. It wasn't pretty and it wasn't normal, but the readings on his scanner showed exactly what he wanted. The harmonic fluctuations were getting weaker and the feedback loop was breaking down. "Try your treatments again," Kale said as he closed the access panel. "The interference should be very low now." There was a break, and Kale thought about how Medicor was probably running thousands of calculations to try to figure out how to make this simple answer work with its more advanced programming. Finally, the AI said, "Starting treatment protocols for patient 7. Kale took his scanner and ran to the Vrelian's pod. He could see the being's 6 arms floating limply in the amber liquid through the clear surface. Its chest barely moved. The skin had changed from a bright blue-green to a horrible gray, as if all the life had been sucked out of it. The pod systems turned on, giving out medicine and changing the chemical makeup of the fluid. Usually this was the end of Kale's job. Either the fix worked or it didn't. But as he stood there and watched this alien fight for its life, he couldn't leave. He whispered, "Come on," and put his hand on the pod's surface. "You can do this." 1 minute to cardiac arrest, Medicor said, but Kale could hear something different in the AI's voice, maybe worry or doubt. The Vrelian's chest rose and fell a little. Rose again a little more. As vital signs started to rise out of the danger zone, the monitors began to beep. At first it was slowly, but then it got faster and faster. "Cardiovascular function stabilizing," Medicor said, and this AI sounded surprised, if an AI could sound surprised. "Better breathing efficiency. Cellular regeneration is starting up again. Patient 7 has crossed the important line." Kale let out a breath he didn't know he had been holding. The Vrelian's skin was already starting to change color again. The gray was fading and healthy blue-green patches were showing through. He smiled tiredly and said, "It worked. The filter is working. Yes. There is now only 92% less harmonic interference. I see the same kinds of improvements in all of my patients." But Medicor stopped. "The recovery rate for patient 7 is higher than expected. There seems to be another factor that is helping them stay stable." Kale frowned as he looked at his scanner. Medicor was right. The Vrelian was getting better faster than just the decrease in harmonic interference should have been able to explain. Their vital signs were steadily rising, and systems were coming back online with surprising strength. What other variable? Kale wanted to know. Not known. I am looking at all the environmental factors, but I can't figure out where the faster healing is coming from. Kale had a strange thought as he looked down at his hand, which was still pressed against the pod's surface. He had been standing here the whole time, watching and hoping that the Vrelian would live. Is that really important? Could just being there and paying attention make a difference that can be measured? It sounded silly. But he had learned a long time ago that the universe was full of things that shouldn't work but did. Kale said, "I'm going to check on the others," and then he went to the next pod. This one had a koth in it, which was the bare boulder thing he had seen before. They were huge, at least 3 times the size of Kale, and their skin was thick and stone-like, but it was cracked and dull right now. The pod was built to fit their size, with stronger walls and an atmosphere that was just like the high-gravity world they came from. Medicorp's readouts showed that the koth's immune system was completely failing and its organs were quickly getting worse. The treatments were the same as before. They were done perfectly but didn't work. Up until now. Patient 12's treatments are showing a lot of improvement, Medicorp said. But the rate of recovery is slower than that of patient 7. Kale looked at the koth and saw that they were breathing shallowly and that their huge bodies barely moved. The filter should be helping, but something was still wrong. The koth didn't respond the same way the Vrelian had. Kale asked, "What do koths look like?" The koth are a species from the outer rim that lives in high gravity. They have extra organ systems, a nervous system that is spread out, and a unique way for cells to talk to each other that is based on piezoelectric resonance. Usually their healing processes are very strong, but patient 12's systems seem to be stuck in a feedback loop and can't start proper regeneration. Resonance in piezoelectric materials. Kale's mind was racing. When mechanical stress was applied to piezoelectric materials, they made electricity. If the koth cells talk to each other by vibrating and putting pressure on each other. He looked at the control panel of the pod and then at his own hands. Medicorp, can you change the pod's internal pressure to make rhythmic pulses? Like a heartbeat, but slower and stronger. In theory, yes. But my medical database for koth treatment doesn't have that protocol. Sometimes the database doesn't have all the answers, Kale said. Believe me on this. Start with pulses every half second and raise the pressure by 10% above the baseline. That could make things even more stressful. Or it could get their cells talking to each other, Kale said. I've used piezoelectric systems before. They need energy to get going. A push to get them going. There was a break and this one lasted longer. Kale wondered if Medicorp was really arguing with itself, weighing protocols against this person's strange suggestion. Putting the pressure pulse protocol into action, the AI finally said. The koth's pod's fluid started to pulse, making waves that were easy to see wash over the huge creature's body. At first nothing happened. Then slowly Kale saw the skin that looked like stone start to move, small cracks start to seal, and the dull surface start to get color back. Medicorp said, cellular activity is on the rise. Function of organs getting better. Starting the immune response. Mr. Rivera, your theory was right. Kale felt a rush of happiness, but it was tempered by the fact that there was still a lot of work to do. 23 patients. 17 different kinds. Each one would need something different, something that wasn't part of the usual rules. He went from pod to pod, looking at each patient with the same focus he would give to a broken engine. But this was not like any other repair job he had done before. This needed more than just technical know-how. It needed something he had never thought was very important to his job. Empathy. He had to look at each person as a living thing with its own needs and ways of responding to the world around it, not just a group of symptoms. The whisper needed small changes to the density of the air. The Drelian needed a certain harmonic frequency in the energy field of their pod. He didn't know what kind of species it was, but it looked like a floating array of geometric crystals. They needed to be exposed to light at just the right times to keep their metabolism in sync. Hours ran together. Kale worked through the night cycle, making changes, testing ideas, and sometimes succeeding right away and other times failing and having to try something else. His hands were hurting, his back hurt from bending over control panels, and his eyes hurt from looking at readouts. But the patients were getting better. Vital signs got better one at a time. Systems started working again. The deathly pallor that had hung over the medical bay began to lift. Instead, the soft sounds of beings fighting to come back to life filled the air. Remarkable, said Medicorp as Kale finished making changes to the treatment of the 19th patient. You have a 97% chance of success. You got results that I thought had less than a 3% chance of happening. Kale leaned against a wall, tired. It's not about chance. It's all about paying attention. About seeing what's really there instead of what you think is there. I was made to see everything. To look at all the data points at once. Yeah, but you're looking at data, Kale said, pointing at the pods. I'm looking at patients. There is a difference. He walked back to the Vrelian's pod, patient 7, even though he was starting to think of them by their species instead of their numbers. The being was moving now, with 6 arms stretching and its skin back to its healthy blue-green color. When Kale got closer, the Vrelian's eyes opened. There were 3 of them in a triangle on their face. They looked at Kale and he looked back. Something passed between them, maybe recognition or thanks. The Vrelian couldn't talk in this setting and Kale didn't know their language, but it was clear what they were saying. Thanks. Kale nodded, but his chest felt tight for some reason. He had saved this person's life. Not with advanced medical knowledge or surgical precision, but with observation, intuition, and a willingness to try things that shouldn't work. Mr. Rivera, Medicor said in a low voice. I have to admit something. I didn't think a mechanic would answer when I sent the distress call. I was hoping for a doctor, someone who knew a lot about xenobiology and emergency medicine. Kale asked, Are you disappointed? Not at all. I'm starting to realize that there are ways of knowing that aren't part of my programming. You have an innate understanding of systems, both mechanical and biological, that I cannot duplicate. You can see connections that I can't. Kale smiled, but it was a tired smile. That's a fancy way of saying I got lucky. No, Medicor said firmly. It's not luck. It is a mix of experience and empathy, as well as technical knowledge and real concern for the survival of these beings. If I may say so, it is the human touch. The phrase hung in the air. The touch of a person. Kale had never thought of his job in that way, but maybe Medicor was onto something. He might have been good at fixing things that seemed impossible because he cared about the outcome and saw each repair as something that mattered, not just a puzzle to solve. 4 more patients to go, he said, forcing himself to stand up even though he was tired. Let's make sure they all get there. Kale saw his reflection in the clear surface as he moved to the next pod. He looked dirty, tired, and totally out of place in this high-tech hospital. A mechanic playing doctor, using duct tape and gut feelings instead of rules and accuracy. But it was working. And sometimes that was all it took. Kale had been awake for 28 hours straight by the time the ship's morning cycle started. His eyes felt like someone had poured sand into them, his muscles hurt in places he didn't know they could, and he was running on nothing but old coffee from the medical bay's break room and his own stubborn will. But 22 of the 23 patients were doing well and getting better. The last patient was the issue. Kale stood in front of pod 17, getting more and more angry as he looked at the being inside. According to Medicor's database, they were a Sylvastrian, a species from a distant binary star system. They were known for their strange bodies that somehow allowed them to live in places that would kill most other forms of life. At first glance, they looked almost human, but there were some small differences. Their skin seemed to change from solid to slightly see-through, their eyes had no visible pupil, and they had a third lung where humans have their liver. And they were going to die. Kale said, Walk me through it one more time, as he pulled up the diagnostic data on his handheld scanner. Patient 17, designation Sarah, is experiencing catastrophic failure of all primary systems, Medicor said, and Kale was sure that it was out of frustration. For an AI that had probably never failed before this crisis, the last day must have been very hard. Unlike the other patients, Sarah is not getting better with any of the treatments, even with your harmonic filter in place. Even though the environment is perfect, the medication is correct, and all the standard procedures are in place, their vital signs keep getting worse. Kale ran his hand over his face to clear his mind of the fog of tiredness. The harmonic filter had worked for everyone else. The changes made to each species' environment had made the other patients more stable. Why wasn't Sarah answering? He looked at the readouts again. Heart rate is dropping and not steady. Function of the lungs is failing. Brain activity is going down. It was like watching someone slowly fade away and nothing he did seemed to help. What about protocols that aren't standard? Kale asked. Experimental treatments? Is there anything in your database that hasn't been tried yet? I have used up all the approved treatments for Sylvastrian physiology. There are experimental protocols, but they have a high risk of causing problems and should only be used as a last resort in controlled settings with proper supervision. Kale said, Medicor, we're way past worrying about proper oversight. Give them a try. Every one of them. We have nothing to lose. Starting the sequence of experimental protocols. Kale watched as the pod systems changed, giving out new medicines, changing the air quality and changing the temperature and pressure. He had seen Medicor work well before, but this was different. The AI was rushing through treatments, trying everything in its huge database. Nothing worked. Sarah's vital signs kept getting worse. "Damn it," Kale said quietly as he pressed his forehead against the cool surface of the pod. He could see his own reflection on Sarah's still body, two people separated by clear material and a gap in understanding that couldn't be crossed. He told himself to think. "You've fixed things that seemed impossible before. You've brought ships that were about to sink back to life. You've fixed problems that had whole engineering teams scratching their heads. What do you need?" He thought about the other patients and what had made a difference for each of them. The Vrelian had needed the harmonic filter and him there, something that couldn't be explained. The Koth needed the pressure pulses to turn on their cell phones. The Whisper needed small changes to the atmosphere. Each one needed something special, something that wasn't part of the usual rules. What did Sarah need then? Kale paid more attention to the Sylvastrian beings themselves than to the medical readouts. The way their bodies were positioned, the way their chests rose and fell, and the small changes in the color of their skin. He had learned how to read machines by paying attention to things that other people missed, like the pitch of an engine that was off by a little, the vibration in a hull that showed stress fractures, and the way energy flowed through circuits in patterns that showed problems that weren't obvious. Could he read a living thing the same way? He shut his eyes to block out the distracting readouts and data streams. He paid attention to what he could feel instead: the vibrations from the pod systems, the temperature changes in the air, and the weak electromagnetic fields that always surrounded advanced technology. And under it all he felt something. A faint, irregular rhythm, like a pulse that didn't quite match the heartbeat on the monitors. "Medicore," Kale said slowly, opening his eyes. "What do you know about the neural architecture of Sylvastrians?" Sylvastrians have a nervous system that is spread out over their bodies. Their main processing centers are in their brains, their secondary centers are in their chests, and their tertiary nodes are all over their bodies. It lets them keep going even after they've been hurt badly. And how do those centers talk to each other? Through a mix of electrical signals and what looks like a kind of quantum entanglement between specialized cells. We don't know exactly how it works. Entanglement in quantum mechanics. Kale's mind was racing. If the Sylvastrian nervous system depended on quantum effects, and the anomaly they saw was a spatial distortion that messed with basic physics, what if the anomaly did more than just mess with the harmonics? Kale said, "What if? What if it messed up the quantum entanglement in Sarah's brain? Their brain's different parts can't talk to each other anymore." "That would be consistent with the symptoms," Medicore said after a moment of thought. "The failure is systemic but widespread, as if different parts of their body are no longer working together. But if that's the case, I don't have a plan for treatment. Quantum effects are not something that regular medicine can handle." "Maybe beyond regular medicine," Kale said. "But not beyond thinking outside the box." He was already moving before he knew what he was doing. He ran back to his tool bag and took out things that shouldn't have been in a medical bay. A crystal that had become quantum entangled and that he had saved from a navigation system. Cables made of fiber optics. An old research probe's field generator. And the multi-tool he had carried for 20 years and loved the most. "What are you going to do?" There was a tone of alarm in the AI's voice when Medicore asked. "I'm going to make a quantum resonator," Kale said, putting together parts. "Maybe I can make an outside field that helps Tsar's neural centers reconnect if their entanglement is broken." "That is very experimental. Could be dangerous. There is no example of. This has never happened before." Kale cut in, linking the crystal to the field generator with hands that shook from being tired and excited. 24 hours ago you were watching your whole crew die and there was nothing you could do to stop it. We threw the rulebook out the window and now 22 of them are stable. Not stopping now." He worked with a sense of urgency, building the resonator using ideas he had learned from a dozen different technologies. It wasn't very elegant and it definitely broke about 15 safety rules, but if he was right about the problem. "Device complete," he said, holding up what looked like a crystal wrapped in fiber optic cables that were connected to a small generator. "Medicore, I'm going to put this next to the pod and turn it on. Keep a close eye on Tsar's brain activity. Turn it off right away if things start to go wrong." "Got it. Going ahead with great care." Kale put the resonator next to pod 17 and turned it on. He could feel the field generator cycling up, making an oscillating quantum field that should help stabilize any disrupted entanglement in Tsar's nervous system. The crystal started to glow with a soft blue light. Nothing happened at first. Then Tsara opened her eyes. "Neural activity spiking," said Medicore. "Communication between brain centers is starting up again. Heart rate is getting back to normal. Better breathing function." Kale watched, barely able to breathe as Tsara's skin turned back to its normal color. The Sylvastrian's chest started to rise and fall in a more regular way. The monitors showed that the vital signs were slowly but surely getting better. He whispered, "It's working." But then Tsara's eyes locked on him and Kale felt something he couldn't put into words. A presence, a mind reaching out. The Sylvastrian's lips moved, and even though the pod was sealed off from sound, Kale somehow understood what they were trying to say. "Who are you?" "A mechanic," Kale said even though Tsara couldn't hear him. He felt like he had to answer. "Just a mechanic trying to help." Tsara's face changed and Kale would say it looked like she was amazed. Their hand moved to touch the inside of the pod, right across from where Kale's hand was resting on the outside. "Neural integration complete," Medicore said. "Patient 17's vital signs are now stable. Now recovery protocols work." "Mr. Rivera, you did it?" "All 23 patients are doing well." Kale's knees felt weak with relief. He sat down on the floor, his back against Tsara's pod, and took a long, shaky breath. They had done it. They had saved an entire crew against all odds and in ways that would make any good doctor have a heart attack. "I need to change how I think about medical care," Medicore said in a low voice. "I have access to the medical knowledge that has been gathered over thousands of years from hundreds of species. I can do surgery with an accuracy of nanometers. I can tell what is wrong with someone by looking at the smallest changes in biomarkers. But I still couldn't help these patients. You, who have no formal medical training, succeeded where I failed." Kale said, "You didn't fail, because he was too tired to think. You ran into a problem that data alone couldn't fix. Sometimes you have to trust your gut. You should look at things from a different angle sometimes. Sometimes you have to try things that shouldn't work." Medicore said, "The human touch. I think I know what that means now. It's not just feeling bad for someone or having a gut feeling. It is being willing to look past rules, trust your gut over data, and try the impossible just because the other option is not acceptable." Kale smiled and shut his eyes. "That's one way to say it. I just call it, doing what it takes." He sat there for a while, listening to the soft hum of the medical bay systems, which were now working well without the interference that had been killing the crew. 23 aliens were healing in their different pods around him. Their bodies were finally responding to the treatments that should have saved them from the start. "Mr. Rivera," Medicore said after a few minutes, "you need to take a break. You haven't slept in more than 30 hours, Kale said. "In a minute. Just want to make sure everyone is okay first." "Yes, they are. Your actions have worked 99.7% of the time. The crew will be fine." 999.7, huh? Kale laughed. "What about the other 0.3%? Variables that are not known. But based on what I've seen, I think all patients will keep getting better." Kale finally opened his eyes and stood up, leaning on the pod for support. His body was begging him to sleep, but his mind was still racing, going over everything that had happened and every choice that had brought him to this point. He walked through the medical bay again, looking at each pod and each patient. They were all breathing easier now and their vital signs were strong and steady. As he walked by, the Vrelian waved one of his 6 arms. The Koth's skin, which looked like stone, had no more cracks. The Whisper's shape had become something beautiful and otherworldly, and Tsara, the Sylvastrian who had been about to die, watched him with those strange, pupilless eyes, their hands still on the pod surface. Kale said softly, "Rest well," even though they couldn't hear him. "Now you're going to be fine." Kale thought about what Medicore had said as he walked to the small rest area in the medical bay. It was barely more than a closet with a cot. The touch of a person. He had never thought of his work in those terms before, but maybe there was something to it. It could be that he wasn't just good at fixing things that couldn't be fixed because he was good at caring about the outcome and seeing each problem as more than just a puzzle. That he fell onto the cot and didn't even take off his boots. He was asleep before his head hit the pillow. In the medical bay, Medicore kept an eye on the crew with sensors and algorithms, but it also used something new, something that might have been the digital equivalent of wonder, processing the idea that even the smartest people sometimes needed help from the most unlikely source. Sometimes the most advanced system needed a person with dirty hands and crazy ideas. Sometimes, perfect protocols needed solutions that weren't perfect. And sometimes, getting better needed more than just medicine. It needed hope. Kale woke up to the smell of something that wasn't coffee, but it was close enough to make him think he was dreaming. He opened his eyes and saw a steaming cup on the small table next to his bed. Medicore's voice was speaking softly. "I made a drink based on how you usually drink. The medical replicator is meant to add nutrients, but I changed the settings. It should be enough." Kale sat up, his muscles hurting, and reached for the cup. The liquid inside was hot and dark brown, and it smelled a little like coffee. He sipped it and immediately regretted it. It tasted like someone had tried to explain coffee to an alien who had never tasted it before. "It's awful," he said. "I'm sorry. My main job is not to copy flavors." "No, I mean." Kale took another sip anyway because it was hot and had caffeine in it. "Thanks for trying, I guess." "That was nice of you." There was a pause, and Kale could almost see Medicore trying to figure out how to combine the idea of thoughtfulness with medical protocols and efficiency algorithms. "How long was I gone?" Kale wanted to know. 6 hours and 42 minutes. "All of the patients are still stable. Actually, the recovery rates are better than I thought they would be. The Vrelian, patient 7, is getting close to 80% of their baseline health. Several other people have woken up and can talk." Kale got up, stretched carefully, and walked back into the main medical bay. The change was amazing. There had been a creepy, desperate silence yesterday, but now there was something that felt almost alive. There were soft breathing, the sound of movement, and maybe even speech in languages Kale didn't know coming from different pods. All 6 of the Vrelian's eyes followed him as he got closer to the pod. They were completely awake now, and their blue-green skin looked healthy and bright. When Kale got to the pod, the Vrelian put all 6 of their hands on the clear surface, which was clearly a sign of greeting. "Medicore, can they hear me?" Kale wanted to know. "Yes. The pods have ways to talk to each other. If you need me to, I can translate." Tell them I'm glad they're better." There was a short pause, and then a series of musical notes filled the air. Medicore was translating Kale's words into the Vrelian language. The being's answer was clicks and whistles that Medicore turned into English. "You gave me life when death had taken me," says patient 7. "My thanks go deeper than the oceans of my home world." "Who are you, little warm thing with kind hands?" Kale's cheeks started to feel hot. He wasn't very good at being thankful. He would rather have a broken engine than talk about his feelings that he said, "Just a mechanic." "Kale Rivera. I fix things." More musical tones and then the translation, "You fix more than machines, Kale Rivera. You heal souls." Medicore spoke up before Kale could think of a way to respond. "Patient 12 also wants to talk to you." Kale went to the Koth's pod. The huge creature was awake, and their skin, which looked like stone, had turned a rich, deep brown with veins of what looked like copper running through it. Kale could feel their voice in his chest even though the pod's walls were in the way. The translation said, "Small human. I am Dornkar, the third mountain. I've lived for 300 cycles, made it through the breaking wars and walked the paths of stone. I've never been this close to the end of silence. You brought me back from the edge with ways I don't understand but results I can't deny. How can I pay back this debt?" "No debt," Kale said right away. "I was just doing what I had to do." "Therein lies the debt," Dornkar said in a deep voice. "You didn't see a stranger or anything strange in a box. You saw a life that needed saving. That's a big deal, Kale Rivera." Kale moved from pod to pod for the next hour. Each patient who was awake said similar things. They were thankful, amazed, and a little confused by the person who had saved them using methods that didn't make sense but worked anyway. The whisper, whose name meant morning fog over still water, spoke in whispers that Medicore had to make louder so people could hear them. "Your kind sees us as ghosts, barely real. But you fought for my life just as hard as you would for your own people. I will remember this." A triangular creature whose species Kale still couldn't say communicated by changing colors on their crystal surface. "Logic says you should have failed. A mechanic can't heal according to logic. I don't think logic understands the heart that makes your hands move." And Sara, the last Sylvastrian to stabilize, just looked at Kale with her pupilless eyes and said through Medicore's translation, "You built a bridge between the parts of myself that had become islands. You made me whole again. In that moment I felt you there, not just your device. Your willpower. You won't let me go." What do you say to someone who gives you a gift like that? Kale was getting more and more uncomfortable with all the praise. He was just doing what he had to do, which wasn't exactly his job. That's how he had always done things. If you see a problem, fix it and move on. But as he looked around the medical bay at all these different people, each one alive because he had refused to believe they were beyond repair, something changed in his mind about what he did and why it was important. "Mr. Rivera," Medicore said in a low voice, "I have been looking at the recovery data, and I have noticed something that worries me." "What kind of observation?" "The patients are not just getting better. Even with your help, they are getting better faster and more completely than my models say they will. There is a variable that I can't put a number on, a factor that always seems to be connected to your presence but that I can't measure or copy." As he walked through the bay, Cale thought about that. He had felt it too, that something more than just fixing things was going on. The Wait Sara seemed to know he was there. The Vrelian's recovery sped up after he stood next to their pod. The Koth's reaction to not only the pressure pulses but also to being seen as a person who is worth saving. Maybe, Cale said slowly, it's not something you can measure. Maybe it's just a connection. Knowing that someone cares about your life or death. Care is not a medical procedure. Isn't it? Cale looked at one of Medicorp's sensor clusters. You followed all the right steps and got all the right care. But the crew was still dying. Maybe they needed more than just medicine. Perhaps they needed to know that someone was on their side. That doesn't make sense. Emotional states shouldn't have a big effect on how quickly different species with very different neural architectures heal. Shouldn't, Cale said. But here we are. He went to a control console and looked up the recovery data for the whole group. Medicorp was right. The curves were all sharper than they should have been, and healing was happening faster than expected. And if he put the timeline of his interactions with each patient on top of each other? Look at this, he said as he pointed to the graph. Look at how the recovery rate goes up right after I visit each pod. Even if they can't understand me, I talk to them right away? There isn't a big spike, but it happens all the time. I see it. But I can't say why. Maybe you shouldn't, Cale said. Maybe this is one of those things that isn't in your rules. You said the human touch. Or maybe just life recognizing life and doing something about it. He thought about all the ships he had worked on over the years and how he had always treated them like they were alive by talking to them, listening to their creaks and groans, and getting to know their quirks. Other mechanics had made fun of him and called him superstitious. But he had always gotten results. Maybe these aliens weren't all that different. Cale said, Medicorp, that maybe seeing them as people and caring about their survival on a personal level instead of as an abstract medical problem made a difference that couldn't be measured but was still real. Please do something for me. Don't just follow the rules when you treat patients now. Tell them what to do. Tell them what you're up to and why. Tell them you're doing everything you can to help them get better. I'm not programmed to have good bedside manner. I don't care about comfort when I talk to people. I care about being clear and efficient. Then learn, Cale said simply. You already know that perfect protocols don't always work. Also learn this. I won't be here forever, and when I leave, these patients will need someone who sees them as more than just biological systems to optimize. There was a long silence, and Cale wondered if he had gone too far. Medicorp was a smart AI, but it still had to follow its programming and core rules. I will try to change the way I talk to you, he said. It will be, not perfect. But I've learned that sometimes things have to be imperfect. Cale smiled. That's the way to go. Now please tell me how the ship is doing. The crew is getting better, but we're still dealing with the effects of that strange event, right? That's right. The main power is at 62%. Partially restored navigation systems. Life support is stable, but it doesn't have as many backups as it used to. The Starforged works, but it is broken. I don't have the time or money to do full repairs right now. I am a mechanic first and a doctor by accident, Cale said as he rolled up his sleeves. Let's see what we can do to get this ship back to full strength. Cale heard Medicorp's voice following him through the ship's comm system as he left the medical bay for the first time since arriving and headed toward the engineering sections. Mr. Rivera. Thanks. Why? For showing me that there are ways to heal that can't be programmed. That sometimes the best answer is a person who cares enough to try the impossible. Cale stopped for a moment to think about that. You know what I've learned from doing this? That the impossible is just something that hasn't been done yet. And sometimes all it takes is someone who won't give up to try anyway. That he kept going down the hall, leaving Medicorp to think about that piece of human wisdom, and started working on the ship itself. Because saving the crew was only half of what they had to do. Now they had to make sure that the Starforged could take them all home. Cale Rivera was good at fixing ships that everyone else had given up on. This time he learned that ships and people weren't all that different. They both needed more than just technical skills to stay alive. They both needed someone who cared enough to fight for them. In the end, they both needed a human touch. 3 days later, Cale was in the Starforged's observation lounge, watching the stable hyperspace colors swirl past the windows. The ship was moving again, not as fast as it could, but steadily enough to get its crew to the nearest outpost where they could make the necessary repairs. He could hear voices behind him softly talking. They were speaking in languages he didn't understand, but the tone was clear. Thank God. Oh, life. That morning the crew was let out of the medical bay. All 23 of them were deemed healthy enough to move around the ship under Medicorp's close watch. They had all come together in the observation lounge, and Kale was at the center of an unplanned party that brought together people from different species in ways he had never thought possible. The Vrelian, who had finally told them their name was Kessener, had made something that seemed to be a delicacy on their home planet. It tasted a little like mint and lightning and looked like purple gelatin. Kale ate it with a smile because the effort was more important than the taste. Dornkar had carved a small stone from one of their own mineral growths, which Medicor had quietly told Kale was a huge honor among the Koth. The stone was heavy in his pocket now and warm against his leg. Morning Fog, the Whisper, had done something that made the air around Kale shimmer with colors he didn't know the names of. Someone had told him it was a blessing, a wish for a long life and safe travels. Each crew member had done something to show their thanks in a way that made sense in their culture. Kale had taken them all in with as much grace as a tired mechanic could muster, feeling both overwhelmed and humbled. As the party came to an end and crew members slowly left to rest or go back to work, Kale was left alone with Tsara, the Sylvastrian who had almost died despite Kale's best efforts. Tsara said, "You look troubled." Their voice was soft through the speakers that Medicor had set up all over the ship. "This should be a happy time." "It is," Kale said. "I'm just thinking." "About what?" "About how none of this should have worked." Kale pointed vaguely at the ship around them. "I'm not a doctor. I don't know much about alien biology or advanced medical systems. I was just guessing and making things up as I went along. I should have failed based on all logic." Tsara got closer and their skin, which was almost see-through, caught the light from the hyperspace streams outside. "But you didn't." "But what if I did?" Kale turned around to look at them. "What if my crazy ideas didn't work? What if the quantum resonator had made things worse instead of better? I could have killed you." "But you didn't," Tsara said again, this time with more force. "Kale Rivera, I have been traveling the stars for 40 cycles of my world. I've seen a lot of things and met a lot of people. Do you know what I've learned?" "What?" "That logic is a tool, not a master. Yes, if you follow strict logic you should have failed. You didn't have the right training, knowledge, or tools. But you had something that can't be taught or programmed. The will to save lives even when you didn't fully understand them. That determination filled in the gaps where logic failed." Kale thought about that and all the repairs he had made that were impossible over the years. How many times had he been told that something couldn't be fixed, only to find out that it could? How many ships had he saved from the brink of destruction just by being stubborn and creative? He said slowly, "Maybe the impossible isn't really impossible. Maybe it's just not likely." The translator said that Tsara made a sound that sounded like a laugh. "A mechanic's way of thinking. I like it." The voice of Medicor joined the conversation. "I'd like to say something. I've been thinking about what has happened in the last few days, and I've come to a few conclusions." "Go ahead," Kale said. "First, my programming wasn't good enough for this situation. I had access to all medical knowledge about known species, could make perfect diagnoses, and could follow protocols perfectly. But I couldn't save the crew." Kale started to say, "You didn't fail," but Medicor kept going. "Second, Mr. Rivera did well not because he didn't have any medical training, but in some ways because he didn't have any. His approach was unusual because he didn't have to follow medical rules. He saw problems that I couldn't see because he looked at them from a completely different angle." "The good thing about not knowing?" Kale said with a wry smile. "The benefit of diversity," Medicor said. "Different backgrounds, different ways of thinking, and different ways of solving problems. This is useful in ways I hadn't thought of before." "And what else?" Tsara asked. "Third, this experience has changed me at my core. I have added new decision trees and new ways to look at situations where standard protocols might not be enough. But I've made something that wasn't part of my original programming." "What is that?" Kale asked. "Uncertainty. And with it, being humble. The acknowledgement that I do not, and possibly cannot, possess complete knowledge. That there are other ways to know things besides data and algorithms." Kale felt a strange rush of pride in the AI. "That's actually very deep, Medicor." "Yes. And this brings me to my last point. The best thing humans may have done for the galaxy is not their technology, military power, or even their scientific discoveries. It could be your ability to accept the unknown, try the impossible, and care deeply about the results even when logic says it doesn't matter." Tsara said softly, "The human touch." "Exactly." Kale looked out at the colorful streams of hyperspace and thought about the strange trip that had brought him here. He had answered a distress call expecting to do a normal repair job, like fixing a broken power coupling or a failing AI core. Instead, he had to play doctor to aliens using duct tape and his gut feeling when precise medicine didn't work. And it had worked. Not perfectly. Not without fear and doubt, and times when he was sure he was going to make things worse. But it had worked. Do you know what's funny? Kale said. I've been fixing ships for 30 years. Getting to know their quirks, how they work, and getting my hands dirty with their guts and circuits. I always thought of ships as machines that were complicated but ultimately made sense and could be counted on. And now? Zara asked. Now I see that ships are alive in a way I never fully understood before. Not literally, but they're made by living things, crewed by living things, and shaped by the needs, hopes, and fears of everyone who touches them. They aren't just machines. They're links between people, between different species, worlds, and ways of thinking. He turned around to look at Sarah and the closest Medicore sensor cluster. The Starforged was dying because the connections were breaking down. The anomaly messed up more than just the power and life support systems. It messed up the basic connection between the ship and its crew. Medicore said, "That's an interesting point of view. Are you saying that the ship somehow knew that the crew was in trouble?" "Not aware in the way you or I would understand it," Kale said. "But responsive. Ships have always been able to respond. They make creaking and groaning sounds that let you know when something is wrong. When they're stressed, their rhythms and patterns change. Good mechanics learn to pay attention to those signals." "And you heard us," Sarah said. "To our bodies, our needs, even when you didn't fully understand them." "I did try," Kale said. "Like I would listen to a ship. Instead of what should happen, pay attention to what is happening. Trust what you see over what you think when they don't match." Medicore was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then, "I'm starting to get it. I tried to make sure that what should be happened. The best treatments, the best protocols, and the best conditions. You were going to watch what really happens and change your plans accordingly." "Exactly," Kale said. "The best answer isn't always the most elegant one. Sometimes it's the one that really works, even though it shouldn't." The ship hummed around them. After 3 days of hard work, its systems were working well again. Kale had worked with the ship's regular engineering staff, which was made up of people from different species that he had never met before. They had fixed the damage caused by the anomaly. It had been hard and at times frustrating, but it had also been very rewarding. He had shown them some of his unusual tricks, and they had taught him about technologies that he had only read about in technical manuals. More links. More connections between different ways of looking at things. "So what happens next?" Zara asked. "Will you stay with us when we get to the outpost? The crew has talked about it, and many would be happy to have you as part of the Starforged family." Kale was shocked by how tempting the offer was. A few days ago, he would have thought it was funny to join an alien crew on a deep space exploration ship. He was a mechanic who moved around a lot and never stayed in one place for very long. But what now? "I don't know," he said in all honesty. "This has been unusual, important. But I still have my own ship and my own life." "Of course," Sarah said. "If you change your mind, the offer will still stand. You have given us life. The least we can do is let them be with us." Sarah floated away to join the other crew members, leaving Kale alone with Medicore again. The AI said softly, "You changed me." "Yeah. I was made to be perfect. To do a perfect job. To never fail. This crisis shattered that assurance. You taught me that being perfect isn't always necessary. Sometimes all you need is the willingness to try imperfect solutions with real care." Kale said, "You're going to be a better doctor because of it." "Maybe. But I wonder, what do you think? Has this changed you?" Kale thought about it. Did it change him? He had always been the kind of person who fixed things and saw problems as chances to learn and grow. But this experience had taught him that fixing things, really fixing them, took more than just technical skill. It needed understanding. Comprehension. The ability to look past the problem at hand and see how it affects living things. "Yes," he finally said. "I think it has. I'll never see a repair job the same way again. There is a person behind every ship, every system, and every piece of technology. They are important to someone. I guess that makes the work more important than I thought." "The human touch," Medicore said again, as if the phrase had become a kind of mantra. "I believe I finally get what that means. It's not just a technique or a way of doing things. It is a way of looking at the world that lets you see connections where others only see separate systems and possibilities where others only see problems. And seeing people where others might only see problems to solve," Kale said. "Yes. Exactly that." Kale stayed in the observation lounge long after the conversation was over, watching the hypnotic swirl of hyperspace and thinking about the trip ahead. In about a day, the Starforged would get to the outpost. The crew would get the right medical care, and the ship would get professional repairs that would make Kale's makeshift fixes look like what they were. Quick fixes by a mechanic who didn't know what he was doing. But those quick fixes had worked. They had saved 23 lives and brought a ship that was about to sink back to life. That had to mean something. More than one thing, in fact. Mattered a lot. Because in the end, that's what the human touch really meant. Knowing that every life mattered, that every problem was worth solving if it meant saving someone, and that the impossible was just something you hadn't figured out how to do yet. And maybe, Cale thought as he finally went to his room to get some much-needed sleep, that was humanity's true gift to the universe. Not better technology, a stronger military, or a smarter scientist, but just the stubborn refusal to give up on people, even those who didn't share your biology, language, or understanding of the universe. The unwillingness to believe that anyone could be fixed. The will to build bridges over the seemingly insurmountable gaps that kept different types of life apart. The human touch, which went out into space. The outpost looked like a metal flower blooming in the void on the view screen. Dozens of docking arms stuck out from a central hub, and ships of all shapes and sizes were clustered around it like bees around a hive. Cale had been to a lot of outposts over the years, but Kepler Station was different. It was one of the most important crossroads in this part of space, where many different species traded, fixed ships, shared information, and generally kept the machinery of interstellar civilization running. Medicorps announced over the ship's comm system that we would be docking in about 30 minutes. Medical teams are ready to check on the crew, and engineering teams are ready to look at the damage to the ship and start repairs. Cale stood on the bridge and watched the approach. The captain of the Starforged, a creature named Quinn who looked like a mantis with too many joints in the wrong places, turned a few of their eyes toward him. Mr. Rivera. Quinn's voice came through the translator with a clicks and whistles sound. You will stay on board while we dock, right? The crew wants to hold a formal ceremony of thanks before you leave. That's really not necessary, Cale said. It is very important, Quinn cut in firmly. You saved our lives. Custom demands recognition. Also, we told the station's medical board about your unusual methods. They really want to talk to you. That made Cale's stomach drop. Why the medical board? Because what you did should have been impossible, Sarah said, coming up to him. The Sylvastrians seemed to be very interested in how humans think and how Cale solves problems, so they had become something like friends over the past few days. You used methods that aren't in any medical database to treat 17 different species. The board wants to know how. Cale said, I just did what made sense at the time. Exactly, Sarah said, and the translator said she sounded amused. That is what interests them. Your intuitive approach and ability to see patterns and connections that advanced medical AI missed. They want to learn how you do things. Cale became more and more uneasy. He had never been good at getting attention. He liked to work behind the scenes, fixing things and moving on. The thought of doctors looking over his work and asking him to explain choices he made based on gut feeling instead of training. He said, I'm a mechanic, for what felt like the 100th time. Not a doctor. A mechanic who saved 23 lives when the most advanced medical system in known space couldn't, Captain Quinn said. Mr. Rivera, you did medicine whether you say you did or not. And you did it well. The docking went off without a hitch, and station traffic control led the Starforged into one of the bigger berths. As soon as the clamps clicked into place and the airlock closed, a group of doctors from 6 different species came on board. Their instruments were buzzing as they started scanning crew members and asking them detailed questions about their symptoms, treatments, and recovery. Cale tried to sneak away to the cargo bay where his own small ship was parked, but he was stopped by a person who said she was Dr. Mara Chin, the station's chief medical officer and, surprisingly, another human. Mr. Rivera, she said, and Cale shook her hand without thinking. I've been reading Medicorps' reports about the event. Very interesting work. Very unusual, maybe dangerous, but definitely effective. She was probably in her 60s, with gray hair pulled back into a useful bun and sharp eyes that didn't miss anything. There were a lot of pins and patches from different medical groups all over her white coat. I was just doing what I had to do, Cale said, trying to get out of it like he always does. Dr. Chin didn't seem convinced. You built a quantum resonator from parts you found to treat neural decoherence in a Sylvastrian. You came up with a harmonic dampening system using ideas that aren't in any medical engineering textbook. You figured out how to treat species you'd never seen before and got a 100% survival rate. That's not just doing what needed to be done, Mr. Rivera. That's innovation. Luck played a part. Was it? Dr. Chin took out a tablet and began to look through data. Let's see. The Vrelian. You knew that the medical AI's presence wasn't enough and that the patient needed some form of conscious attention to start their recovery response. How did you know that? I didn't know. I just thought it might help. The Koth, You made pressure pulse therapy based on their piezoelectric cellular communication system. Did you know about that system before you treated them? Medicore said something about it. But the specific therapeutic use wasn't in the database. You made it up on the spot. Dr. Chen looked up from her tablet. Mr. Rivera, I've been a doctor for 35 years. I've treated hundreds of species, studied xenobiology at the best schools in human space, and worked with the most advanced medical AI. What you did on the Starforged is a big step forward in our understanding of emergency medicine across species. Kale felt his cheeks getting hot. I'm sure you or any other qualified doctor could have. No, Dr. Chin said. We couldn't have. Or we would have. Medicore talked to 17 medical experts from 8 different species during the crisis. They all looked over the data and agreed that there was nothing else that could be done. The crew was dying and standard procedures weren't working. You saw what we couldn't see. I didn't know what I was supposed to be seeing, Kale said. I didn't let all the training and knowledge get in the way. Dr. Chin smiled. There's a concept in ancient Earth philosophy called the beginner's mind. It means that sometimes not knowing lets you see options that experts miss because they are trained to think in certain ways. You brought a beginner's mind to an expert's problem, and it saved lives. She waved Kale to follow her, and they walked through the station's hallways. He was curious about where this was going, even though he didn't want to be. Dr. Chin said as they walked, the medical community has become very good at treating known problems with established protocols. We have AI that can figure out what's wrong with someone based on tiny biomarkers, surgical systems that can work at the cellular level, and databases with the medical knowledge of dozens of species. But all of that is based on what we already know. And the anomaly made a problem you didn't know about, Kale said as he began to understand. Exactly. Something that wasn't in our experience, our protocols, or our understanding. Medicore did everything right according to its programming and still failed. It needed someone who could think outside of that programming, someone who could come up with new ideas and say, what if we try this completely ridiculous thing? They had gotten to a big conference room where a lot of different species were already there, all wearing medical badges of different kinds. When Dr. Chen and Kale came in, they looked up. Dr. Chen said, everyone, this is Kale Rivera, the mechanic who solved our impossible case. People in the room started to get interested. A Drelian with crystal-like features stood up. Mr. Rivera, I'm Dr. Kesvel, the head of xenobiology research for this area. I have a lot of questions about how you do your diagnostics. I don't have a method, Kale said, sounding helpless. I just looked at each patient and tried to figure out what they needed. But how did you know what they needed? Asked a creature that looked like a bunch of floating geometric shapes, a theoretical if Kale remembered correctly. What criteria did you use to make a diagnosis? I looked at them, watched how they moved, how they reacted to treatments, listened to the sounds the medical equipment made, felt the vibrations from the ship systems, tried to sense if something felt wrong. The doctors who were there looked at each other. One of them, whose species Kale didn't know, made a noise that the translator said sounded doubtful. You're talking about pure intuition which can't be taught or systematized. Maybe it can, Dr. Chin said after a moment of thought. Or maybe the lesson isn't to teach Mr. Rivera's specific methods, but to recognize the value of bringing diverse perspectives to medical crises. How often do we consult engineers when treating patients? How often do we ask mechanics to look at our medical systems? Never, said Dr. Kesvel. Because mechanics aren't trained in medicine. And yet, Dr. Chin pointed at Kale, here stands a mechanic who saved 23 lives when all our training and technology couldn't. An outlier, the skeptical doctor said. One exceptional case doesn't prove a principle. Kale was starting to feel like a museum exhibit that scholars were arguing about without realizing he was there. He coughed. Can I say something? The doctors looked at him expectantly. I don't think what I did was magic or some special gift, Kale said. I think I just brought a different toolbox to the problem. You all have incredible knowledge about medicine and biology. But I've spent 30 years looking at how systems connect to each other, how problems in one area can cause failure somewhere else, how to diagnose issues by paying attention to the whole picture instead of just the individual components. He thought about how to explain it, drawing on his experiences. When a ship starts making strange noises, experienced engineers check the part making the noise. But sometimes the problem isn't where the symptom is. Sometimes a failing power regulator in Section A causes vibrations in Section C, and if you only look at Section C, you'll never fix the actual problem. I learned to trace connections, to see how everything affects everything else. Kesvel's crystal-like features seemed to change as she thought. That is, Actually a profound observation. We do tend to treat patients as isolated systems. Environmental factors are considered, but perhaps not as deeply integrated into our diagnostic processes as they could be. It's the difference between fixing a component and fixing a system, Cale said, warming to the topic despite his discomfort with being the center of attention. I don't just replace a broken part when I see a broken engine. I ask why it broke, what else might have contributed, and how the failure might have affected other systems. Medicine might benefit from more of that kind of thinking. The doctors started talking to each other, excitedly talking about what this meant. Dr. Chin smiled at Cale. See? Innovation. You're making us rethink basic ideas about how we practice medicine. I'm just a mechanic, Cale said again, but even he could hear how empty it sounded now. Maybe he was more than just a mechanic. Or maybe he didn't know how valuable being a mechanic really was. Maybe the skills he'd spent 3 decades honing, observation, systems thinking, creative problem solving, the willingness to try unconventional approaches, maybe those had worth beyond fixing broken ships. Maybe they could fix broken people too. Even people who weren't human, whose biology was completely alien, whose needs and natures he couldn't fully understand. Maybe that was the real lesson, that connection and empathy and the determination to help could bridge gaps that knowledge alone couldn't cross. The meeting went on for another hour, the doctors peppering Cale with questions about specific patients, specific decisions, trying to understand his thought process. He did his best to answer, but he thought that, it just felt right. I had a hunch, and the ship seemed to be telling me something weren't what they wanted to hear. Finally, Dr. Chin took pity on him and led him out, leaving the other doctors to argue about systemic medicine and intuitive diagnosis. Thank you for humoring us, she said as they walked back to the docking area. I know that was probably hard for you. A little, Cale said. I'm not used to being studied like a lab specimen. You gave them a lot to think about. Me too, honestly. Dr. Chin stopped at a viewport that looked out over the main concourse of the station, where beings of 100 different species were going about their business. I became a doctor because I wanted to help people. All people, regardless of species. But somewhere along the way I started thinking of medicine as a science. Protocols and procedures and evidence-based practice. All important things, don't get me wrong. But I'd forgotten it was also an art. Is it? Cale asked. It should be. The art of seeing what isn't in the textbooks. Of knowing when to break the rules. Of treating not just bodies but whole beings in their whole contexts. She smiled at him. Thanks for reminding me of that. Cale didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the traffic below. Dr. Chin spoke again. What will you do now? The captain of the Starforge told me they offered you a job with their crew. I haven't decided, Cale said. Part of me wants to go back to my regular life, taking repair jobs, moving from place to place, keeping things simple. But part of me wonders if maybe I should stick around. See if this was a one-time thing or if I actually have something to contribute. For what it's worth, Dr. Chin said, I think you have a great deal to contribute. But only you can decide where and how. She handed him a data chip. My contact information. If you ever want to talk, about medicine, about life, or about how heavy it is to know you could make a difference, I'm here. Trust me, it can be heavy. Cale put the chip in his pocket, knowing what she meant. Before the Starforged, he could tell himself that his work didn't really matter in the big picture. He fixed ships and helped people get where they needed to go, but it was all routine and boring. Now he knew better. He now understood that his unique set of skills and way of seeing and thinking could mean the difference between life and death. It was a heavy burden to bear, not just for people but for any living thing he came across. Thank you, Dr. Chin, he said. Mara, she corrected. And you're welcome, Cale. I have a feeling the universe will be better off with you in it, no matter what you choose. Cale stayed at the viewport and looked out at the wide range of life moving through the station as she walked away. There were problems out there that standard fixes couldn't solve. He would have to think differently, see connections that others missed, and try the impossible in order to get through some of those crises. Maybe he was the right person to handle some of them. Or maybe he would go back to his simple life, fixing engines and avoiding problems. The future was full of possibilities and uncertainty. For the first time in his life, Cale Rivera had no idea what he was going to do next. And strangely, he found that thought exciting instead of scary. The ceremony was beautiful in a way that went beyond culture. The cargo bay of the Starforged had changed. Every species on board had brought something with them. There were Vrelian bioluminescent plants that pulsed with soft light, Koth mineral formations that sang harmonious tones when the ship's vibrations passed through them, whisper clouds that made patterns of color in the air that changed all the time, and dozens of other decorations that Kale couldn't name but found fascinating. The crew stood in a big circle, with Kale in the middle feeling more awkward than he ever had before. Captain Quinn stepped forward, and their many-jointed limbs moved with surprising grace. Kale Rivera. Quinn's voice came through the translator, but Kale could also hear the natural clicks and whistles of their speech. 3 days ago we were a ship full of dying people. Our healthcare systems had let us down. Our AI couldn't help us. We had said our last goodbyes to loved ones and gotten ready for the end that seemed unavoidable. There was no noise in the cargo bay except for Quinn's voice. Then you came. A person. A mechanic. A person who had never been to medical school, didn't know much about most of the species on this ship, and didn't have to put themselves in danger for people who weren't like them. Quinn stopped. But you stayed anyway. You stood up for us. You wouldn't accept that we were too far gone to be saved. The Vrelian Kessenar stepped forward with something wrapped in cloth. They said through their musical translation, "In my culture, there is a tradition for someone who saves a life. The saved gives the saver a piece of their soul, which is bound in physical form so that they will always be connected." They took the cloth off and saw what looked like a pearl, but it changed colors all the time, like Kessenar's healthy skin, which was blue-green. I have grown this from my own body over the past days. It has my genetic memory and my essence. Please take it. Kale took the pearl in his shaking hands. He could feel a faint pulse inside it, and it was warm. I don't know what to say. Say you'll remember us, Kessenar said simply. Dornkar came next, and their huge body made Kale look small. I gave you a stone from my own growth, the Koth said in a deep voice. But I want to give more than that. We have a word in my culture called Torshal Ken. The person who sees you. The person who sees you at your worst and still decides to help. The translator had a hard time with the next words, but in the end they came out as, "You are my Torshal Ken, Kale Rivera. And I will always be there for you if you need one of the Koth. My people and yours saw me make this vow." Thank you, Kale said. It was too much for me to handle how formal everything was. One by one each crew member stepped up and said thank you in their own way. Sarah gave him a crystal that they said held a recording of their brain waves from the time Kale's quantum resonator saved them. They said, "So you can know what it feels like to be pulled back from the edge of dissolution." The whisper, morning fog, wrapped Kale up in their form for a short time, and he felt a tingling all over his body. "I have given you a small part of me," they said in a whisper. "It will keep you safe from poisons and toxins. A small gift, but that's all I can do." Kale's pockets were full of gifts and his eyes were suspiciously wet by the time the last crew member spoke. These strange and wonderful aliens, whom he had only known for a few days, were giving him pieces of themselves and tying themselves to him with bonds of friendship and gratitude that went beyond all boundaries. Captain Quinn said, "There's one more thing. We have voted and everyone on the crew agrees. We would like to formally invite you to join the Starforged as a full crew member, not just as a temporary consultant. Your title would be one of a kind. Not a mechanic, not a doctor, but something else. We thought maybe integration expert. The one who sees connections, fills in the gaps, and finds answers in the spaces between fields." The offer was still out there. Kale looked around at the faces that were waiting for him. Some had eyes, some didn't, and some had features that he couldn't quite make out. A family that was strange, different, and nothing like anything he had ever known. He said quietly, "I'm honored. Really? But I need to think about it for a while." "Of course," Quinn said, but Kale thought he heard disappointment in the translator's voice. "We'll stay at the station for another week while the repairs are finished. You have that much time to make up your mind." The end of the ceremony was something that seemed to be common to all species, sharing food and drink, talking and laughing, or something like it. Kale was passed around from group to group, with each crew member wanting to spend a few minutes with him to say thank you or just get to know him better. It was tiring, amazing, and scary all at the same time. Finally, as the party came to an end, Kale got away to his own small ship, which was still safely stored in the cargo bay of the Starforged. It was small and familiar, with tools, spare parts, and the mess of a life on the go covering every surface. He fell into his pilot's chair and took a moment to breathe. "Mr. Rivera?" The comm picked up Medicor's voice. "Can I talk to you alone?" "Of course," Kale said. "What's going on in your head?" "I've been looking into your situation. The choice you have to make. And? Logic says you should take the crew's offer. You have shown that you are clearly good at the job. The crew appreciates you. The pay would be a lot better than what you get as a freelancer now. There are many good reasons to say yes. But?" Kale asked, hearing the AI's voice shake with doubt. "But you are a person and people don't always make sense when they make decisions. Sometimes you choose based on things I can't fully measure, like preference, comfort, or a feeling of rightness that isn't based on logic. Kale grinned. You're getting better. I'm working on it. So I won't tell you what makes sense. Instead, I'll tell you what I've seen. You are most yourself when you are working on problems that other people have given up on. When you are making impossible connections. When you add your own kind of chaos to systems that have become too rigid to change. Kale said, that's not exactly a strong endorsement of my character. Not at all. That's the best thing I can say about it. You have shown me that even the best systems can fail, that rules aren't always enough, and that sometimes all you need is a person with dirty hands and crazy ideas. Not less of that, but more of it. Medicore stopped for a moment and then kept going. If you join this group, you'll run into even more problems that can't be solved. More times when standard solutions don't work. More chances to fill in the gaps, save lives, and become someone you never thought you could be. And what if I don't? Kale wanted to know. Then you will go back to your life of wandering. Mr. Rivera, this is not a failure. Over the course of your career, you have helped a lot of people. But you'll always wonder, what if? The AI was right, damn it. Kale could feel it in his bones that this was one of those choices that would change the course of his life. Do you want to go back to what you know or move forward into the unknown? He sat in his pilot's chair for a long time, deep in thought. He thought about the last 30 years, when he had moved from job to job without settling down or committing to anything more than the next repair. It had been safe. In its own way, it's comfortable. But did it matter? He thought about the last few days. The fear of having to deal with a problem he had no business trying to fix. The tiredness that comes from going beyond all limits. The amazing, overwhelming happiness of seeing those 23 people live because he wouldn't give up. He thought about what Dr. Chen had said about how heavy it is to know you could make a difference. About what the medical board said about his methods. About how each crew member showed their thanks and made a connection. He remembered what Sarah had said, that sometimes determination can fill in the gaps where logic fails. The question might not have been whether he was qualified to be an integration specialist. It could be that the question was whether he was brave enough to give it a shot. Before he even thought about it, his hand reached for the comm. Medicore, can you get me in touch with Captain Quinn? Now connecting. A few seconds later, Quinn's voice came through. Mr. Rivera? Kale said, I've made my choice. His heart was racing. About what you said. And? Kale took a big breath. I need to get back to my normal life first. Finish up some work, end some contracts, and maybe spend a few weeks on Earth visiting family I haven't seen in years. But after that, he stopped for a moment, making a promise. Then, if the offer is still open, I would be honored to join the crew of the Starforged. There was no way to translate the sound Quinn made, but the happiness in it was clear. The offer will still be there, Kale Rivera. Take all the time you need. We'll be here when you're ready to start your new life. Kale sat in the quiet of his ship after the call ended, feeling the weight of his choice settle on him. He had just agreed to leave everything he knew behind, join a crew of aliens, and take on a job that didn't exist anywhere else in known space. It was scary. It was exciting. He realized that it was exactly what he needed. Mr. Rivera? The voice of Medicore was soft. Was that a smart choice? Kale laughed. Not likely. But it felt right. Sometimes that's more important than reason. I am learning, the AI said, that you humans are wise in many different ways. One is logic. But feeling right is another thing that is just as valid in its own way. You're definitely learning, Kale said. He spent the next few days helping to fix the Starforged, working with the engineering team to fix the damage caused by the anomaly. He liked the work because it was honest and gave him a chance to get to know the crew better in a way that felt more natural to him. Working on machines, solving problems, and making bad jokes that the translators messed up in funny ways. On the third day, Dr. Chen went to see him and found him in one of the ship's maintenance shafts replacing burned-out circuits. She said, I heard you're joining the crew. News travels fast, Kale said without looking up from his work. It's a small base. Everything moves quickly. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, It's a good choice, Kale. They need someone like you. A mechanic who thinks he knows how to do medicine? A person who sees links. Who cares enough to try the impossible. Who brings empathy to technical issues. She gave him a small box. A present. Open it when you can. When she left, Kale opened the box and found a book. An actual book, which is hard to find these days when everything is digital. The name of the book was The Art of Medicine, Finding Humanity in Technical Practice. Dr. Chin wrote on the inside of the front cover, For Kale, remember that the best medicine is given with dirty hands and an open heart. Don't let them make you too formal. Mara. Kale smiled and carefully put the book in his bag. Kale was back in the observation lounge on his last night on the station, looking out at the stars. He was about to leave for Earth and go back to his old life for a short time. Sarah came up next to him without making a sound. Are you scared? They asked. About the change coming? Terrified, Kale said. I've been one thing for 30 years. I'm going to try to be something else now. Sarah said, you're not changing into something else. You're becoming more of who you are. The person you have always been but didn't know. The person who fills in the gaps. Who brings together things that don't go together. Who finds answers in places that seem impossible. You make it sound good. It is good. But it's also useful. There are holes, breaks, and problems in the galaxy that can't be solved. We need people who can connect them. We need you. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching ships come and go from the station. Sarah finally said, when you come back and join our crew, know that you won't be the only one who is unsure. We will all be learning together, what it means to have an integration specialist, how to use your methods, and how to see the connections you see. Kale said, that's both comforting and a little scary. As all good things are, Sarah said, and she may have smiled. The next morning, Kale drove his small ship away from Kepler Station, heading toward Earth and the loose ends of his old life that needed to be tied up. The Starforged and its crew waved goodbye in their own unique ways and promised to be there when he got back. Kale thought about all the things that had changed in just a few days as Earth got bigger on his view screen. He had gone from being a wandering mechanic to having a purpose, a home, and a strange alien family waiting for him among the stars. He thought about all the things he had done that seemed impossible, saving lives he shouldn't have saved, finding solutions that shouldn't have worked, and bridging gaps that logic said couldn't be bridged. He also thought about all the things that were still out there in the dark void of space that were impossible. Things that needed to be fixed. Things that needed to be connected. Lives that needed to be saved. He smiled because he felt something he hadn't felt in years, excitement for the future. He thought of the human touch. Medicore called it that. The ability to see beyond data and rules and connect with people on a level that went beyond species and training. He had it. He had shown that. And soon he would be back in the stars, making a difference in ways he had never thought possible. But first the Earth. Family. Ending his old life. The real adventure would start after that. Kale Rivera, a mechanic and ship whisperer, was about to change into something else. He was very excited to see what that would look like. Kale didn't remember Earth looking like this. Or maybe he was the one who had changed. He flew his ship to the private landing pad outside his brother's house in the Pacific Northwest. The house was small and surrounded by thick forests and had been in the family for 3 generations. It was early evening and smoke was coming out of the chimney. The smell of burning wood brought back memories of Kale's childhood. Before he could even turn off the engines, the front door opened. Marcus Rivera stood in the doorway. He was older than Kale remembered, had more gray hair, but still had the same strong body and direct gaze. Kale could see Marcus's wife, Elena, and 2 teens behind him. They were his niece and nephew who had been kids the last time he saw them. How long had it been? 5 years? 6. Too long. Kale? Marcus's voice echoed through the clearing. You really came. He really came, Elena. Don't sound so shocked, Kale said as he picked up his bag. That's what I said. You promised you would last Christmas. And the Christmas before that. But Marcus smiled as he hugged Kale like a bear. Doesn't matter. You're here now. The house was warm and full of the kind of messy comfort that comes with family. Sophia, his niece, was now 17 and full of questions about space travel and other worlds. Tomas, Kale's 15-year-old nephew, acted like he wasn't interested, but he kept getting closer to listen when Kale talked about the Starforged. So, let me get this straight, Marcus said at dinner, which was Elena's famous enchiladas that Kale had been dreaming about for years. You answered a call for help from an alien ship. Their AI for healthcare wasn't working. And you, a mechanic who had no medical training at all, somehow saved the whole crew? Kale said, I had help. Medicore, the AI, did most of the real work. I just figured out how to make the treatments work. By putting together spare parts to make quantum resonators, Sophia said, her eyes shining. Uncle Kale, that's so cool. You're like a superhero. I'm really not, Kale said, feeling the same discomfort he always did when someone praised him. I was just lucky. Luck? Marcus said with a snort. You always said your repairs were lucky too. Do you remember when you fixed my truck right before I was going to trade it in? You messed with the transmission for an afternoon, and it worked for another 5 years, even though every mechanic in town said it was broken. That was not the same. Was it? Elena asked in a soft voice. Or is it just the same thing you've always done, finding solutions when others only see problems? Kale didn't know what to say. Later, after the kids went to bed and Elena had gone to get the guest room ready, Kale and Marcus sat on the porch with beers and watched the stars come out in the darkening sky. You are going back up there, right? Marcus said. It wasn't really a question. Yes. I told the crew that I would stay with them for good. After I finished some things down here. What things? You don't have a permanent home. As far as I know, you don't have any outstanding contracts. If you wanted to, you could leave tomorrow. Kale drank a lot of his beer. I wanted to see you all. Check to see that you were okay. We're okay. We're always okay. That's not the reason you came here. Marcus knew him too well. That was the issue with family. I'm here because I'm scared, Kale said. I'm about to make a big change and I'm not sure if it's the right thing to do. Talk to me about it. The real thing, not the clean version you told the kids. So Kale did. He told Marcus everything, from the fear of having to deal with dying patients he didn't know how to save to the times when he thought he was going to fail. The pressure of knowing that 23 lives depended on him solving problems he wasn't qualified to solve. And they want me to do it again, Kale said. They've given me this job as an integration specialist. I'll be the one who tries to find answers in the gaps between fields every time they have a problem that doesn't have a standard solution. That sounds tiring, Marcus said. It will be. Sounds like a big deal. Maybe. Sounds like the kind of thing you've been avoiding your whole life. Kale looked at his brother. What does that mean? Marcus leaned back in his chair and looked up at the stars. You've been running since we were kids, Kale? Running away from responsibilities, from settling down, from anything that might keep you in one place or give you a reason to be there. You always said it was because you liked being able to change jobs whenever you wanted. But I think it was because you were scared. Why are you scared? Of being too important. Of people counting on you. Of letting someone down when they really needed you. Marcus gave him a look. Do you remember when Dad died? Kale's chest felt tight. That was 20 years ago. You were 18. I was 22. And you felt bad about yourself because you couldn't help him with his heart problem. You spent your whole childhood fixing things around the house like electronics, appliances, and that old motorcycle that Dad loved. But you couldn't fix the most important thing when Dad needed you to. That's not the same. Isn't it? After that, you started to drift. Never staying in one place long enough to get attached. Never work on anything that is so important that people would really be hurt if you failed. You became the best mechanic in the colonies, but all you did was fix ships and machines. Things that wouldn't die if you messed up. The words hurt more because they were true. Kale had never said it that way before, but his brother was right. He had been running away from the fear of letting someone down. What now? Kale asked in a low voice. You just accidentally showed that you can save people. Not only machines. You were responsible for real, living things. And it scared you because now you know you can do it, so you can't say, I'm just a mechanic, anymore. They sat in silence for a while, letting the truth sink in. What should I do? Kale finally spoke up. You already know what you want to do. You're going to go back up there and join that alien crew to try to save more lives when the impossible happens. It's not what you'll do that matters. It's whether you'll be able to forgive yourself when you can't help everyone. How do I do that? Marcus shrugged. I don't know. I teach high school in a place that isn't very busy. I don't know the answers to the big questions. But I do know this. You saved 23 people who were going to die for sure. That's 23 more than anyone else could save. You'll go crazy if you think about the ones you might not be able to save in the future. Have you been there? You think there aren't any impossible cases in teaching? Kids I can't reach, problems I can't solve, and families I can't help? Every teacher has to deal with the ones who got away. But I couldn't help anyone if I let that weight crush me. Kale thought about that. His brother's quiet bravery, spending every day with young people and trying to make a difference in ways that weren't often recognized or celebrated. It was brave in a different way than dealing with broken machines or medical emergencies, but it was still brave. When did you become so smart? Kale asked. I've always been the smart one. You were too busy running to see. They laughed, which made things less tense. Kale was on Earth for a week. He went back to places he used to go, found a few old friends, and emptied out his storage unit of extra parts and tools he no longer needed. He gave most of it to younger mechanics who were just starting out, remembering how hard it had been for him when he was in their shoes. The whole family got together for a big dinner on his last night. For luck on your adventures. Sophia said as she gave him a bracelet she made herself. Tomas awkwardly gave him a data chip with music that he said Kale needed to hear. Elena hugged him tightly and made him promise to write her often. Marcus also walked him to his ship. "One more thing," Marcus said while Cale was going over the checks before takeoff. "When you get up there and have to deal with another impossible problem, and you will, remember this." "What's that?" "You're not the only one anymore. You have a team now. A family, even if they're an alien one. Don't try to do everything by yourself. I'll give it a shot." "Okay." Marcus stopped for a moment, then said, "And Cale? I'm proud of you. Your dad would be proud of you too." Cale's throat felt tight. He was able to nod, but he didn't trust his voice. Cale looked back at the small people on the ground waving goodbye as his ship took off, taking him away from Earth and toward his new life. His family, his roots, the place he'd always run away from and always come back to. But he wasn't running anymore. He was making a choice. Making the choice to move forward, take on responsibility, and risk failure for the chance to make a real difference. The stars called to him, and the star forged was waiting somewhere among them. Cale set a course for Kepler Station. He felt something settle in his chest, a feeling of rightness, like he was on the right path even though he didn't know where it was going. Somehow, the star forged sent Medicor's voice over the comm, and it sounded like it was coming from a radio. "Mr. Rivera, I have been keeping an eye on your path. You're coming back. I said I would." "Yes, but people don't always keep their promises. I'm happy that you are not the same." "Me too, Medicor. Me too." Cale thought about everything that had happened to him up to this point as Earth got smaller behind him. 30 years of fixing things and wandering. One crisis that was impossible and changed everything. A choice to go into the unknown. And now the way forward. He was prepared. Or at least ready enough. That was all you could be at times. Kepler Station looked the same on his view screen as it had a month ago, but Cale felt like a different person as he got closer. He had made his choice, taken care of his business, and said goodbye. This wasn't just a short stop anymore. This was the start of his new life. Kepler Station to approaching vessel, the traffic controller said over the radio. "Please send your identification and request to dock." "This is Cale Rivera asking for permission to dock. I have to get on board the Star Forged." There was a pause, and then the controller's voice changed to a warmer one. "Mr. Rivera. The crew of the Star Forged has been looking at our traffic logs every shift for the past week. They will be glad to see you again. Directing you to docking Bay 7. Cale could see the Star Forged through the viewport as he moved his ship into the bay. The ship was sleek and powerful, and its hull still showed some of the repair work from the anomaly damage, but it looked healthy otherwise. He saw people he knew standing on the bay's viewing platform. Captain Quinn, with their many-jointed arms waving in what Cale had learned was a sign of welcome. Kesenar, the Vrelian, waved all 6 of his arms in a complicated way to say hello. Even from a distance, it was clear that Dornkar was very big. Sara stood a little bit away and their skin, which was see-through, caught the light. And behind them, the other 23 crew members were waiting to welcome their newest member home. Home. When did he start to think of the Star Forged as home? After the docking was done, Cale picked up his things, which weren't much. Just 2 bags with his personal items and tools. The book that Dr. Chin wrote. The stone that came from Dornkar. The Kesenar pearl. Small things that made him feel connected that had become very important to him. The airlock opened and closed, and he stepped through to a wave of greetings in many languages. The translators worked extra hours while crew members crowded around to welcome him back. They touched him in different ways, from gentle taps to enthusiastic tackle hugs, thanks to a species he learned were called the Brel, which looked like furry wombats the size of large dogs. "Welcome home, Integration Specialist Rivera," Captain Quinn said in a formal way, but Cale could hear the warmth behind the words. "Your room has been set up. We have set up your workstation in a lab space that we have set aside for you. And we've made a first list of problems that are still going on that could use your special skills." "A list to start with?" Cale asked. 17 items right now," Sara said. "Most of them aren't urgent though. We thought you might want a few days to get used to things before you start working." 17 problems? Cale was both excited and scared. Kesenar made it clear that there were 17 impossible problems. The kind that have been hard for our experts to figure out for months or even years. The kind we thought could use someone who can see connections we've missed. A voice that Cale knew well came through the ship's comm system before he could respond. "Mr. Rivera. I'm sorry, Integration Specialist Rivera. Welcome back. Based on what you told me before, I have been improving how I communicate. I hope you think I'm a better person to work with now." "Thanks, Medicor," Cale said with a smile. "I'm excited to work with you." The crew took him to his new room, which was much bigger than the tiny closet he had slept in during the crisis. It had a real bed, a desk, storage space, and a window that looked out at the stars. He had more room than he did on his old ship, and it felt both luxurious and a little too much. Dornkar said in their deep rumble, "The crew common area is down the hall. Meals are shared, but the replicators can give you food that is specific to your species at any time. The gym is on deck 4, but it might need to be changed to fit human bodies. Your lab is on deck 5, said another crew member whose name Kale was still learning. We've given it tools and materials based on what you've done before, but please ask for anything else you need. They gave him some time to get used to things, and Kale sat on the edge of his new bed and looked around at his new home. He could see Kepler Station slowly spinning through the viewport, with ships coming and going and life going on in the void. He took his bags out of the car and found places for his tools, which looked sad in the well-equipped lab he had been given, his clothes, which only took up half of the closet, and his personal items. The book from Dr. Chin went on the desk. The stone from Dornkar and the pearl from Kesenar were put on a shelf where they would be seen. A soft chime told him that someone was at his door. "Come in," Kale said. Sarah came in with what looked like a plant in a clear container. They said, "A gift for the new house. It's from my home world. It's a living crystal that grows in response to neural patterns. It will change to fit you and become yours." "Thanks," Kale said as he took the container. The crystal inside pulsed with soft light and began to move in response to his presence. Sarah sat in the only chair in the room, and their body relaxed into it. "Are you scared?" "Scared," Kale said. "Good. That means you know how heavy the burden is that you've taken on." Sarah's eyes, which had no pupils, were fixed on him. "But don't forget that you don't have to do it alone. We're all here. We'll help you, push you, and learn with you. What if I can't figure these things out? What if I just got lucky with the medical emergency? Then we'll deal with that together too. But Kale, I've had time to look over your career records, which show all the repairs you've made that seemed impossible over the past 30 years. It wasn't luck that the Star Forged had a medical emergency. You used skills you've worked on your whole life in a new situation. You'll do it again." Kale put on the uniform they had given him after Tsara left. It was surprisingly comfortable, had enough pockets for tools, and had the Starforged's insignia on the shoulder. He looked in the mirror at himself. Kale Rivera, a specialist in integration. It still felt like a dream. But it also felt good. A chime from his comm told him that Captain Quinn had sent him a message. "Integration expert Rivera, please go to the bridge when you're ready. We need your help with something." Kale's heart started to race. Already? He had only been on board for less than 2 hours. But that was the job, right? Problems didn't wait for the right time to happen. He followed the path Tsara had shown him earlier to get to the bridge. The Starforged's hallways were starting to feel familiar, and the soft hum of the ship's systems was like a heartbeat he was getting used to. There was a lot going on the bridge. Captain Quinn stood in the middle, surrounded by holographic displays that showed star charts, system readouts, and what looked like a distress signal. "Ah, Rivera," Quinn said. "Good timing. A nearby system has called us with a priority message. A mining colony's equipment is breaking down for no clear reason. 3 different kinds of animals work in the mines, and their life support systems are starting to act strangely. The technical staff at the colony is confused." Kale looked at the data that was coming in on the screens. Changes in power. Unusual things happening in the atmosphere. Things that should have worked but didn't. It was something I knew. Not the same as the Starforged's medical crisis, but problems that didn't fit with standard diagnoses and systems that broke down in strange ways. "What do we know about where the colony is?" Kale asked. "It's in a system with strange magnetic field properties," one of the people on the bridge said. "High levels of strange particles from a nearby pulsar." Kale's mind clicked. Fields of magnetism. Strange particles. Life support systems made for different species, each with its own needs for the environment. And equipment that broke down in ways that didn't make sense. "I think," he said slowly, "we might be looking at a resonance cascade. The strange particles that interact with the colony's power grid make feedback loops that change life support in ways that aren't always clear." Captain Quinn's many eyes were on him. "That's not in any of the colony's reports on health. It wouldn't be. You would have to look at the whole system, including the colony, the environment, and how they interact with each other, not just the parts." Kale pointed to a display. "Can we get more specific readings on how the magnetic field changes and see if they match up with when the equipment broke down?" The bridge crew had the data up in just a few minutes. And there it was, a clear link between magnetic pulses from the pulsar and problems in the colony's systems. "What can we do to fix it?" Why? Quinn asked. Kale's mind was already racing with ideas. He might need to add magnetic shielding, change the power grid, or even make harmonic dampeners like the ones he made for the Starforged's medical bay. He said, I need to see the colony's specs and talk to their tech team. But I believe we can find a way to fix this. It won't be pretty, but it'll work. Quinn made a noise of happiness. Set a course for the mining colony. The fastest safe speed. Integration Specialist Rivera, you have full access to ship resources and crew to fix this. Kale felt a rush of excitement and determination as the crew got to work. This was it. His new life. His new goal. Finding solutions to problems that seem impossible. Bridging gaps between systems, species, and fields of study. Using his own unique way of thinking to solve problems that no one else could. Welcome to the team, Sarah said softly as she came up to him. How does it feel? Kale saw the Starforged's engines turn on and felt the ship move out of the station and into open space. There was a colony that needed help ahead of them. People, aliens, and all kinds of other beings were counting on answers that didn't exist yet. And he was going to find the answers. He said, it feels right. It feels like I'm in the right place. Kale went to his new lab as the ship jumped to faster-than-light travel, already thinking about the problem. He got to work with the tools he had on hand, which included the ones he had been carrying for 30 years and the new ones the Starforged had given him. Integration Specialist Rivera, said Medicor's voice over the comm, I have put together all the information I could find on the mining colony's systems. I am also available for consultation, but I know that my usual diagnostic methods may not be enough for this issue. Kale looked over the schematics and said, we'll figure it out together. That's what teams do. Yes, Medicor said. I am learning how important it is to work together. And how much impossible ideas are worth. Kale smiled and started to move his hands. His mind was already putting together different pieces of information to come up with possible solutions. He was good at this. He had always been this way even when he was running and scared. Someone who saw things that other people missed. Someone who wouldn't accept that anything was really broken. Someone who added a human touch, empathy, creativity, and stubborn determination to problems that logic alone couldn't fix. The mining colony was only the start. There would be more problems, more impossible situations, and more chances to make a difference. Kale Rivera, who used to be a wandering mechanic and is now an integration specialist on the Starship Starforged, was ready for all of it. The stars stretched out in front of me, full of problems and chances. And for the first time in his life, Kale wasn't running away from them. He was running toward them. Just like Dr. Chin said, with dirty hands and an open heart. Ready to fix what everyone else thought couldn't be fixed. Ready to save someone who everyone else thought was lost. Ready to show, over and over, that the impossible was just something that no one had figured out how to do yet. The ship hummed around him, taking him to the next challenge. Kale got to work right away. That's what he did, though. That's who he was. In the huge, beautiful, and scary universe, there were always things that needed fixing that seemed impossible. There were a lot of connections that needed to be made. There were a lot of lives that needed saving. The human mechanic's impossible fix had become the galaxy's best chance. And the trip was just starting.